actually a real acceleration from 2011 to 2020 under Vinyl Plus. Since then, we've really had significant growth with year-on-year improvements through these voluntary commitments. So it has been a real success story, Karen, which I'm sure is very familiar to most of our European delegates, but perhaps less familiar to our delegates from other parts of the world. And what does this actually represent? Well, it represents roughly a third of all the PVC waste that's actually been generated there. And actually, I shouldn't really use the word waste. You know, we should be looking at waste as resources now. So even our terminology is so important. I think the four key areas that have made a significant contribution to this total is first and foremost window profiles. I'm going to hear a lot more about that from Charlotte. But secondly, flexible PVC, including flooring. But it's not just flooring. There's also been roofing and waterproof membranes. And then the third area is pipes. But you don't get so many pipes coming back into end of life because they tend to take on other purpose. So they get repurposed as such. And the other big area that's contributed to our overall total is actually cables. So there's a lot of cable waste which is generated around Europe. And by and large, it's been the copper that people have wanted from that, which is the higher valued element of it. But what we've been able to do as a PVC industry is to take all of that sheathing and insulation material and actually not use it back into cables because if we had any residual copper there, we could have, God forbid, a short circuit. So the cable end-of-life material has really gone into new applications, in particular things like road management, road cones, for want of a better phrase. That said, as an industry, we're always looking to put it into the highest value applications possible. And therefore, windows going back into profile applications is really important. But to set the scene, if you like, Karen, what we've done is a great transitional achievement so far. But then the question is the other 2/3 of PVC, and that's really an opportunity for really the next chapter in the story of the PVC industry. And I think there were some very important messages that came out from this morning's presentation about what we need to do with regard to that.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Now, because windows are getting such good marks on that graph that you've just shown everyone there, Jason, I'm going to go over to Charlotte because, Charlotte, as you've told me, windows have really considered themselves very much a blueprint for the circular economy for over 2 decades now. Obviously, vinyl does have a very long story, and it can be proud of the many achievements over that time. Give us a quick overview of your industry achievements in the window sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Karen. I'll gladly do that. Indeed, as Jason has already nicely introduced, window profiles represent almost half of the PVC volume that is being recycled of the total PVC volume that is recycled every year. And I've listened to many presentations today, and I've heard PVC windows used very often as an example, and that's probably because they have over 2 decades, as you said, over 25 years already been recycled, because back then the industry said, well, we need to take responsibility for the material that we're generating. We are the producers, we put them on the market, but what happens 40 years later, we will take charge of this. And this has been quite a big development and many investment, because it means separate collection that needs to be installed, getting the windows back into the hands of a recycler. So installing recycling capacity and technology that can actually deal with the windows. And then most importantly, if we talk circular, we mean windows into windows, coming up with the extrusion technology, so co-extrusion technology, making the material usable again in new window frames. And indeed, quite successfully today, half of all those old windows that are being recycled actually go back into windows, and the rest go back into other construction applications, such as pipes, for instance.
Okay, thank you very much for that overview. And Jane, over to you now, because you have very long experience in recycling and collection projects covering a number of different plastic products. Tell us about the achievements that are specific to flooring where you are now.
So flooring has also been collecting and recycling, particularly since the early 90s. And similarly to the window sector, the flooring sector decided that it needed to take responsibility for the product at the end of its life. So they set up a recycling facility called AGPR in Germany, which is still operational. And there are also many collection schemes for flooring across Europe, including in the UK, RicoFloor, which I helped to set up. And I think one of the key challenges for floor coverings is the challenge of collecting, because they arise in reasonably small volumes over large geographical areas, and unlike windows, they're not as easy to identify. It's not as easy to separate a PVC floor from a carpet, from a laminate floor. And so there we do have a challenge. But the pre-consumer material is recycled and very often in-house by our members, and they have invested heavily in processes to enable them to do so. And post-consumer flooring is recycled, not usually back into flooring, but into other applications. And post-installation waste is a very important waste for us. It's the waste that comes when a contractor installs a floor, and it arises in very small volumes, but about 10% per building for each fitting is waste. So that is recycled, often collected by the manufacturers themselves in take-back schemes and recycled back into new flooring.
Thanks very much for that overview. Now, Cheryl, I'm going to come back to you, because having heard all of this from the industry, and of course you brought in some very salient examples yourself, do you have any particular advice to the PVC industry in their journey towards the circular economy, quite advanced as it is? And could you possibly, for instance, see a role for Zero Waste Scotland in facilitating this?
Absolutely. And it's been really interesting for me to hear about the activity that is already taking place. And more than that, I think it's that understanding of, it's already been mentioned about the place recycling has to play, but then can we push it further, and can we make sure it's closed loop recycling, window back into window, for example. So I think just continuing in that journey and that, continuing to innovate and to collaborate with yourself, but also other industries and other sectors as well, because I think that's sometimes where we need to build these networks, and we can really start to see different innovation take place that we didn't expect. Certainly that's our experience. You look something completely different, but putting a bakery and a brewery together that wouldn't normally be speaking to each other. So I think that's really, really important. In net zero targets as well, it's great to see that you've got the voluntary commitments, but I think having targets, having goals are really useful to just aim towards, but also to help measure progress as well. And I think in terms of Zero Waste Scotland, you said yourself, we are all about supporting innovation